All right, you guys, I have such a treat for you all today. I have a few of my clients here. And as I mentioned in the intro to this podcast, one of the interesting things that I have found as I have started my business and more clients are coming to me is there's this interesting thread that I never expected in my marketing of PhDs who are in the air, right, around me. And what I realized was because I talk so much about this like good student, one right answer mindset and how that then affects us as employees, that it would end up resonating. It wasn't even an intention that I had, but it's just been so fun. And so I wanted to have a few of my really badass clients on today who are all either through their PhD program or currently in it to get their unique perspective about coming into entrepreneurship from like the pinnacle of being the best student. And then I think there's going to be some other fun things we're going to cover because all of you guys, I think you guys are all PhDs in psychology. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I'm also interested to cover from the lens of like you guys scaling a coaching business versus like there are lots of options available to you going the PhD of psychology route. And so I'm also very curious to cover at the end, like what really resonated for you about going this route within both entrepreneurship and coaching. So I'm going to start. We're going to do sort of go around the table. I have specific questions for each of you. And then at the end, we'll just maybe do like a few like general, I just want to pick your brains on just general topics around coming out of that school mentality, being really good at like taking in information and feeding it back out to what you're now doing in your business, which is, I want to hear, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. So I just want to hear from you guys what your experience has been. But first, Laura, I want to start with you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us who you are.
Sure. Hello, my name is Laura McCaffrey, and I am a life coach for analytical thinkers. So I help folks get out of anxiety, burnout, overwhelm, so that way they can feel calm and confident in their lives and careers. And I am also studying organizational leadership, which is a branch of business psychology for my PhD program. And I am currently in the dissertation phase. I just submitted my application to IRB, so I'm getting close to the end at this point.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Can you please tell everybody what your dissertation is on? Because I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, so I am studying the experience of intuition in women leaders in STEM fields. So it's basically how they use or don't use intuition in their own leadership in a very male-dominated, logic-driven field.
Yes. And maybe we don't need to read your paper, but one of the things that I have really loved, and I have seen, I don't even know where to go from now because I feel like we could dive into your story. Actually, let's dive into your story first, and then we'll like sort of round the corner back to your work in the world and what you're doing and why it's like so important. Because Laura was my one-on-one client, and now you were in the first round of the mastermind. You're coming into your second round. Can you tell everybody what's going on with you in your business right now before we actually start at the beginning?
Yeah, totally. My business is completely blowing up right now. Just over the last few weeks, few months, I have become fully booked and I broke my first 10K month. So really exciting things are happening. A lot of momentum for me in my business right now.
I love it so much. And I remember back to our consultation for one-on-one coaching. And I remember in that, I know you so much more now, but at the time, one of the things that we covered was how you had this like really strong relationship with your own intuition. And let's be real, you're pretty witchy.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's this strong piece of you, but it wasn't coming out at all in your business in the way that you wanted to be expressing it. And so I just have watched your brand. And when I think about the way that I teach, our brand is just an extension of ourselves and what you have allowed to express through you. And I don't know. There's so many fun things. I know you challenged yourself last October to go like live every day. So if you were to like just give us a quick like snapshot of your business in the last year, what are the biggest transformations? And like both, maybe if it's a mindset thing, maybe if it was like a specific strategy that like almost forced, I feel like you're into like, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to rise to this standard. And on the other side of this is who I'm going to be. So like, what have some of those things been for you?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that really flipped the switch on that was the challenge that I set out for myself last October. So I did a 30-day go live challenge for myself, and I talked about mystical practices for your logical life. And this was kind of like my emerging onto the scene as my witchy self and also as an engineer. Like that's what my background is. And like I have a very outwardly logical life, right? Like I work as an engineer, I'm an entrepreneur on the side. I was an entrepreneur on the side. And I also, I'm doing my PhD. So all of this is kind of like very logical to people. But I also had this side that I wasn't expressing. And I really wanted to challenge myself to put it out there in a way that just like felt good to me for 30 days. And before this, I had been doing videos, but not a lot, right? So I really had just started doing videos maybe in the summer. And then in October, I was like, okay, here we go. Rip off the Band-Aid. We're going live every day for 30 days. And that really just enhanced my self-concept to be someone who was able to do that, was able to speak in a way that felt really good to me on video about topics that maybe previously I was scared to explore. So that kind of just like set me off in a new direction where I was able to be freer around what I wanted to express.
Yeah. So if you were to like specifically like talking about your identity shift in that month, like really ground us into like, what are you fear to express? Who were you on the other side of that? Because I've seen, it seems like that was this tipping point. And since then, it's just been like almost this inevitability around the growth in your business. And so I would just love to get to know who you were before and after that.
Yeah. I think that I always had a very strong connection to my intuition. That is kind of like the work that brought me to coaching. And even the work that brought me to my PhD program was getting in touch with this side of myself and really wanting to explore like, what is this? What like academically is it? How do we use it in our lives? Why don't some people feel like they're connected to their own inner knowing? And part of me thought that when I did talk about intuition in my business, it had to be in that same academic manner that I was gearing up to do in my PhD program, and I kind of like lost that fun side of it. That was like my actual practice of intuition and how that incorporates itself into my life. So I think that what happened through the video challenge was that I was able to like unleash myself a little bit. So that way I wasn't as handcuffed to the idea of having this really academic voice in a space where that wasn't necessarily what resonated with people or what I felt most comfortable presenting, right? Like that felt a little bit more contrived than what I even wanted to be doing. So it really allowed me to unleash that side of myself on the other end.
I love it. And then thinking about unleashing that side of yourself within your business and then also allowing yourself, I want to sort of round the corner now to like this dissertation that you have around how intuition plays out. And I mean, I think we could look at this with, I think I mentioned on the podcast at this point, it will have been like a couple weeks ago for people around my husband is an engineer, very rational, logical, got a perfect score on his SATs. And when he uses the word intuitive, the way that he uses it is basically just like something that is like, it feels intuitive because it's a subconscious belief. So for people who are not psychology nerds like us, could you like break down in layman's terms, like what is intuition? What is conscious? What is subconscious? Like, what are these
Yeah.
things?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that I define intuition when I use it is that you are taking information from many sources and processing it non-consciously, right? So you're not having like a thought process that you normally would have where you hear something like a sentence in your brain and then you start to rationalize it. Intuition is information that comes up from your emotions, from your body knowledge, from long-term stored historical memories or things that you have just learned and are stored in your brain, and then that processing is not on the conscious level. So it's not like the sentence pops up in your mind and you're like logicking through it. It's a knowing. It's actually like a more embodied sense of knowledge. And that's how I define intuition. And I'm sure there's loads of other ways that people might define it out there, but that's how I use it in my study.
Yeah. So I'm curious then, and I don't know, Jacqueline, you feel free to jump in because I think we were going, but like I'm now just while we have like the intuition person here, it is so interesting to me because it's like, I think what so many people struggle with when it comes to their intuition is if it's something that is just long term and stored, it could just be a bunch of bullshit from your parents versus like something that is like, almost like a deeper knowing. And so it's interesting because when I see people come into work, like personal development work, where they're getting to know themselves, it's like, how do I know what is my intuition?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a very common question, of course. And the way that I describe to people how to know whether it's intuition or fear, really, because that's like a fear-based response if you have like all these stories that are cropping up for you that seem unconscious, right? And the way that I describe the difference is a more embodied feeling. When it's your intuition, it feels more like an openness. And when it's fear response, it feels like clenching or closed. So it's more of an embodied differentiation between the two things.
Yeah. Which I think that, I mean, this is not going to be a podcast on intuition. We could nerd out so much, but I just find so many people when they come into this, they're like disassociated from their body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually want to make a whole podcast on this. I was thinking about it the other day because I was like, why is that when so many of my clients come, they can't even feel their emotions. They can't even like feel their bodies. And then I remembered, I'm like, wait, there's that Gallup poll on how like 70% of employees are cognitively and emotionally like disconnected from their work, which essentially means sleepwalking, right? So if you've like disconnected to get by, I'm like, oh, you would be sort of just like a brain in a jar, very disassociated. And I don't like, I'm sure there's like many other things that we could explore there, but it almost feels like for people that are listening and you're kind of interested, first of all, if you're interested in exploring your intuition, you should go hire Laura. But secondly, like, I think that it's so interesting. It's like the first step is almost like being able to even understand and be in touch with like, what am I feeling in my body? And then nothing is available. And once you do that, the other pieces unlock. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the first things I work with my clients on is how to come into relationship with your own body, because we are very socialized to disconnect from our bodies. Like you said, as employees in a capitalistic society, we are kind of trained to be just a brain, right? And to ignore the body's signals so that way we can be productive, we can be optimized, right? And then as women, we are also sent additional messages that our bodies are wrong, messy, need to be controlled. So there is a lot of separation that happens between our rational brain and what goes on below the neck. So that absolutely is one of the first things I work on, is kind of teaching my clients tools to come back into relationship with their bodies.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, it's so funny because I think when people first start, they're like, wait, like body what? Like, I don't even understand why I would want that. And I'm like, trust me, you're going to want to. And I think especially for people listening, because it's people coming into entrepreneurship, it is like coming back into connection. Like it's all going to be your decisions. It's all going to be like what you're choosing to do. And coming where you're like able to be like, wait, how am I feeling? Like, am I about to market from like a weird place, or am I like marketing from like a really clean place where I'm like showing up from service? Like it almost is like the body keeps the score. It's a book I haven't read, but like I have a friend who's really into somatic stuff. And the more that I hang out with her, it's just so interesting. Like the mind, yes, there's the mind and the feelings and that drives actions, but then your body learns certain sort of ways of being. I don't know. I find it all very interesting. We're sort of getting off topic, but I just love this. And I know there are people listening that are like, oh, this is like, definitely something that I hadn't really considered. So do you know what feelings are happening in your body? But before we move on to Jacqueline, I have one more question for you, Laura. And the note that I made about you that's been so interesting to watch you on your journey was you I was thinking about how to like frame this because I actually think the framing of it is part of the problem. But like you have been a person over time that like there's almost this like great pride and like I can get shit done. And so actually like people will love this. When I was trying to figure out a podcast time, I was like, okay, Laura, like, my client Stephanie, who you guys will meet in a bit, she's out in California. So I was trying to find a time. Laura, you're in New York. So I was like, Laura, could you do it before work? You're like, well, I leave for work at 5 a.m. So I was like, okay, well, that's out. Like I didn't, but like you go to work at 5 a.m., you work a full-time job, you're creating like $10,000 months in your business. You have kids, you have a dissertation. And so it's like the shift I've noticed in you is like this being willing for it to be hard versus almost like your brain used to just insist it be like unnecessarily hard to count. Can you just like unpack that a little bit for us? Because I think there's like, I think high achievers have this a little bit, and I see it particularly. And I was thinking about this. I don't even know, like, do you come from like a blue collar background? Like your family?
So my family definitely would have been considered, like lower middle class, I guess, when we were growing up. My dad worked in an insurance company. He worked at the post office before that, and my mom worked jobs, but not a career. And definitely kind of like always knew work and was always taught that like hard work was where it's at. Like, this is what you're going to do. This is how you support yourself. You are going to work really hard. And if you're not working hard, that means that something's up, right? Like, not that I was ever told that that's lazy, but that like hard work was the ideal. Like, this is what you're going to do. You're going to work really hard to create this success for yourself. And no one else is going to do it for you. It's all on you. So I definitely was brought up with that mentality. And I think that throughout my life, the results that I had gotten came from working really hard. And it kind of like proved to myself, yes, that's the way to be successful, is to work really hard. And I knew that I was capable, right? Like I knew that I was capable of taking on a lot, and I was willing to do that over and over and over again. But I think what has shifted, and it's interesting because my identity as an academic and my identity as an entrepreneur kind of like were birthed at the same time, right? Like I started my PhD program in 2017. My business, I started that shortly after. But what I learned in both of those, kind of like in parallel, was that in order to do that level of work in the world and have the impact that I wanted, I couldn't do it feeling shitty. So I had to figure out a different way of doing things. And I think that, it took me a couple years to get to this place where I'm willing to, yes, like work and put in effort, but not in a way that like is that striving that feels like white knuckling it or forcing or having it like actually feel hard. Like right now, I would say that everything, my PhD and my business, feels easier than ever. And, I think that this is the time when most people would think, oh my goodness, like that must be really hard and like be really tough to figure out. And it's not, it's the opposite.
Yeah, I love it. And it really is like people think hustle is a mindset, right? I think hustle comes from when you're sort of like white knuckling through something versus like what I'm seeing now. One, I mean, I did challenge you. I'm like, Laura, make double the money with half the action, because it was sort of like seeing where you were at. I'm like, if Laura doesn't break this now, right? It's like to scale to where you want it to scale. And so it's been so fun to see you really do the mindset work of like, how can I scale my business, write my dissertation, be it you're like a manager of a, I don't know, team or department at work, right? Like you're doing so many things, but it's all coming from this place where it like, yes, it can feel very easy. So if people were to like steal some of your thoughts, what would they be?
Well, my favorite thought right now is I do whatever the fuck I want whenever the fuck I want to. And that is literally my favorite thought. Also, just things like I am willing to let it be easy. I am willing to just like do things that feel fun. I am willing to not overthink the way that I'm posting and marketing, right? And just like letting things come out of me and not over editing myself.
Yes. So I want to like add it's not, I don't know if it's an addendum, but I almost feel like there is this place where people can get to, and it's like, I do whatever the fuck I want, whenever I want. And that is definitely the answer. But I always like, because I know that there's going to be some people who are at the beginning of their business and like their fear brain runs like 80%, right? And so if they were to be like, well, I don't want to, right? So it's like, what would you say to that person who is like, well, I don't want to do anything ever, but I want to have a business? How do they get to where you are?
Well, I think that it's just the part of acknowledging that, like, yes, you want to have a business, right? So it's like, okay, then are you willing to try these things out, right? Because I think that we get so wrapped up in like, it should look like this, or I should sound like this, or my posts are supposed to be once a day for 5 days a week, right? But are you willing to experiment a little bit and fall on your face a few times and like maybe sound not like you want to sound in order to figure it out? Because you just following a script or like the rules of posting however many times or whatever else those rules in your mind look like, that's not what's going to get you there. So it's kind of like, are you willing to do that for yourself in order to create the business that you want?
Yes. And I think that's like almost a little yeah, if we were like writing a book, that would be like the asterisk, right? On to like, I do whatever the fuck I want, whatever I want. Like the asterisk that has to go there, I think is like, once you have really grounded into the like a growth mindset that's willing to get out and be in the mud, then it's like, yes. Otherwise, I think, and I struggled with this when I first started my business. I had major perfectionist brain. We're going to talk about it in a little bit, the good student thing, but we'll do that as a roundtable. And so I think especially because I feel like I attract a lot of, almost past me's, we want to like speak to where that person is at. And yes, like it's possible for everybody, but yeah, you got to start where you are and be willing to sort of get in the mud a little bit. All right, Laura, thank you so much. Now I want to hear from you, Miss Jacqueline. Tell us about you.
Hello, I'm Jacqueline Smith, and I'm a life coach also for the Type A high achievers out there. And I'm also a doctoral student earning my PhD in clinical psychology. I'm a rising second year in that program. And before that, I got my master's in behavioral science. So also very much in the psych space, a lot of vigorous head nodding to much of what Laura was saying. So I realize people won't be able to see that, but yes, love what has been shared so far.
Yeah, but it feels like you're like, and tell me like where I'm off, but it feels like Laura's thing is like, I'm witchy as all hell, and I'm going to help like the rational STEM women who recognize there's something else, like basically come home to themselves. Whereas I feel like Jacqueline, you're like, your person is a little bit more, I don't know, they're not necessarily in academia. They're more from that high achiever category, and they live in like, I'm checking all the boxes. These are all my shoulds. What's going on? Like, and so it's a little bit of a different.
Yeah, absolutely. They totally identify in that overworking category. Less on the witchy side than
we'll get you there, Jacqueline.
Yeah. But very much identifying by the high achieving, overworking, and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And one of the things that I had down for you, and I'll be honest, I actually don't even know specifically your story, but like just a little that like I do know about your past and your family. What I had down was like, I'm just curious for you. I have coming from a family with status, and like what your experience has been like choosing something non-traditional.
Oh, that's a good question. I think it has multiple parts because my parents are business owners. So the idea of owning a business or being an entrepreneur isn't totally foreign to my family by any means. And I would say that they have been a huge support system as I started my business in 2020. So in just this year plus that I've been in business. So to that extent, it's not completely foreign. That being said, it is even psychology is sort of non-traditional.
Yeah, that's what I have written down. Like it wasn't, and I don't even know about the entrepreneurship. I wrote like, psychology, because I remembered you said your grandfather said something once about like psychology.
Yes. Well, generally speaking, I think generationally, psychology is relatively new to the scene in terms of where people's focus and attention is. And I think part of that is, what has become the most pressing issues in our society. And that's not entirely true, but at least here in Western cultures where you can have everything readily available to you, you can get food delivered, you can get everything under the sun, like in your fingertips within, a day at most. Then we start to realize, wait a minute, it was never any of those things that actually directly impacted our mental health. So it must be something else, right? There's got to be something going on. And I think with that, we see the boom of like the mental health industries, even beyond just psychology itself, which is a little bit different. But yeah, so I think that to that extent, it very much has become and will continue to become one of the top priorities of our generation and the ones after, but wasn't necessarily from my grandfather, even from my parents, though they have been very welcoming to having a psychologist in the family. Not sure if that entirely answers your question, but it is sort of a mixed bag because it's non-traditional, but becoming increasingly popularized.
Yeah. Well, I think it is just funny because for me, I came from tech in San Francisco. I was in a group of friends that like all of them pretty much had Harvard MBAs. And like, it's just been interesting as they're like seeing, like friends are seeing like stuff that's going on with me. They're like, what's going on with this coaching thing? It turns out that like taking time to look at your thoughts can create some like pretty phenomenal results. So I'm curious, and maybe we dive in. We're going to just flow with this, but like the questions that coming up for me right now, and Laura, like feel free to jump in as well after Jacqueline, but like for like choosing, I'm going to study psychology as a PhD, but then making the decision, but like the business I want to have is around coaching. Like what for you created that decision?
For me, it was very much that when I arrived, so I did my master's at Brown and I got there first semester, so eager. And I thought that was going to be the thing, right? I thought, oh, grad school, Ivy League, like this is everything. These are all my check boxes at this age, right? Doing well, so to speak. And it just fell like a wet blanket. It was like, is this it? Like, is this how I'm supposed to feel about my life and about the trajectory of my career? Like, this is not feeling so great. And I don't think I really even had words at the time to describe what that sensation was like, because it wasn't totally disenchanted or disappointed. It was just like, man, I don't know what else should I be striving for. Right? What else is on the list that's going to be the thing that makes me all of a sudden feel great about myself and about my life, given that I was in a situation where it was like, I seemingly had all the things, right? I'm in a very loving relationship. I was in graduate school, have great friends, great family. And it was that realization that made me say to myself, wow, if I'm studying this and it's not working for me, what do I do? Right? What's the solution after that? Where do you go? And so really just kind of on a limb as my quarter life crisis, I decided to hire a coach and just figured, you know what? Why not? Let's see what she's got. Maybe she'll tell me the next thing that I can strive for, and that'll be the thing, right? And that'll feel good. Meanwhile, this is like while I'm applying to PhD programs too. So of course I'm still very much in that mindset of if I work hard enough, one day it's all just going to click into place. And as soon as I started working with the coach, I was like, oh, this is it. I need to be doing this. I had no interest in becoming an entrepreneur. That was never like part of the plan. It very much was that I loved the work to the point where I was like, I can't walk away from this. I have to be involved in this. And as they say, the rest is history.
So what has because you were in the first round of the mastermind, you're coming into the second round, you've had your first $10,000 month. So like, what has your biggest transformation been and your experience thus far?
Oh, it's hard to say just one. I was thinking about this prior to our call, and I would say that one of many that stuck out to me was a really subtle shift from the validation seeking to the validation giving. So when I applied for the first round of the mastermind, I remember setting my alarm, to be the first one to click on it and all the things. And I wrote in my application, I'm going to be the best student. And it was very on brand for the way that I had always thought about life and even about my business up until that point. Whereas going into the second round of the mastermind, I think I sent you a message, a couple of weeks earlier and was just like, hey, so I'm definitely in for the next one, right? Like, I don't have to reapply. And you were like, no, you should still reapply, but like, of course you'll be in it. And so I did the second application, and I remember writing in that one, it was like, I don't need to be the best student, right? I need to be the best business owner by my standards, the best business owner for my business. And I'm so thankful to be in this room with you and with my peers, but I'm not looking to be the student taking notes, with my notebook, right? Like I always have. So I would say that was one of them that really stuck out to me.
I actually distinctly remember you used the word, I don't know if it was innovation or innovator of your own business, but that was like noted on my end as well. Like just the stark contrast between like the first round being like, I'm going to be the best student, to like the second round being like, I'm going to be the best, I think you said the best innovator of my business. And just what a foundational identity shift you had within that context.
Yeah, I really think it was. And I'm hoping for new entrepreneurs that they're hearing me on this, in the sense that if you're thinking that you're the student, then there's really never enough of Catherine's time or attention that you could get, right? It's always like she's got the answers, so I need to have all of her, right? If I could just have her brain, then somehow my business would be better in some way. And it's like, of course not, right? That's why it's your business. There's so much to be learned from Catherine, but there's also so much to be learned from knowing yourself and knowing what's going to work best in your specific marketplace with your specific clientele. So I think that that's such a profound thing to, for the people that are just getting started, to realize, like, yes, pick your teachers wisely and listen to them, but don't continue to view yourself as the student, like you are a peer, a colleague.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting too. I've been thinking a lot about like the words that I think I'm going to have a whole podcast. I haven't decided. I'm like, it's going to be really nerdy. But I want to have an entire content, like podcast episode around words and how words matter. And even like, I've been thinking about using the word students. It's something that my coach uses to describe her masterminders. And I'm like, I actually that doesn't resonate for me in like the container of what I'm wanting to create. And I've just been thinking about the difference between like, I was talking to my husband about this the other day. I almost think it's like, the path of like studying under someone to like just achieve mastery in something for yourself. And it's like a different thing, right? Like it's a different experience than like student and teacher. And like what I think about is just looking at each of your businesses, how different your brands are, how different the way that you like the tone of your marketing, right? Like everybody looks different in the room. And yet how is it that everybody is able to get results? And so I'm just like, I try to like teach things, okay, like these are foundational principles. And then how can you put them on and tailor them to fit you and how you want to run your business? And then maybe there's something that I'm like, hey, yes, this is a thing. And you're like, yeah, fuck that. I was just thinking my coach teaches, I don't even know. I think it's like a 9 email, some sort of email sequence. And I'm just like, yeah, no. Like there's so many things that I make my money back. I make more than my money back every time. And as I've thought about that, it's like not from being the best student that's always studying the book. It's like being able to take the teaching that she has and distill them down to why, right? I'm like, oh, okay. Like my brain was like asking in the last launch. I'm like, okay, well, like she teaches this specific email sequence. Should I do that? And then when I asked myself, I was like, I don't want to. And I liked my reasons for not wanting to. And I was like, well, why does she teach that? And as I like explored it for myself, I'm like, oh yes. And like why she teaches that is like the magic I'm pouring into other containers. So for people who are listening, this is like a little bit of like, it's the wizard, not the wand kind of moment. I was like, yeah, I'm going to cover some emails, but it's not going to be in this specific process I was taught. And I was thinking about this a little bit of like how we're taught English and how it's like, don't start a sentence with the word and, or don't start a sentence with the word but, right? And it's like, when you're just starting in something, it's almost good to have these like very basic rules. But then as you learn English more, it's actually like, no, you can start a sentence with and, you can start a sentence with but. It's just a little more complex what you need to do to make it a grammatically accurate sentence, right? And so I think sometimes is this like a missing the forest for the trees kind of thing, right? Where it's like, don't take a teaching and blindly adopt it, I guess, is like what I'm going for. And I think that you guys can speak to this like so beautifully just from your experience of like lifelong kind of learners, like going as high as you can within academia and then coming into entrepreneurship and like recognizing it's a different world. Jacqueline, I'm curious, like, what has your experience been like going from this academia where it's like, okay, I want to be able to like learn, can I get the right answer on the test? Like that sort of thing to I'm the innovator in my own business. What has that been like for you?
It's been a challenge in some ways. And then it's funny especially at being a part of the mastermind, you see where different people have strengths and weaknesses from whatever they did before. And so I think the same is true of PhD programs, where for a long time, there was a very clearly delineated hierarchy, and there still is in academia and as well for students, right? Where you go next and what you do next and so forth. And that was a real challenge going into entrepreneurship, because that structure no longer exists, right? It's just a one-man show, so you don't have that. And for anyone who hasn't listened to your episode on the internal manager, I highly recommend going back and doing that, because that's what happens, right? If you don't have that structure in place, then it just exists within you. And suddenly you're operating as the CEO, the manager, and the employee in your own business. So you need to know what's going on in there. So in that way, it was a big challenge. In other ways, it has been a strength in terms of PhD programs tend to be very research oriented, and research is always asking, what do we not know yet? As opposed to like, what do we already know? And so to that end, there was plenty curiosity on my part, both in my program and in my business, of like, where can I keep innovating? I think that's probably where that word on the application came from, is like, when I am pulling those skills from my program, it is around that innovation. But yeah, to your point, before that was in place, there was always this sense of validation seeking. Like, even if it's not the right answer per se, it's the right way to do things, right? The most appropriate or the best etiquette kind of within academia. And that has lingered in my business too, especially around knowing the best evidence-based answer as opposed to my opinion, right? The sort of like opinion versus fact notion. And that's something that has been such a challenge. And I see Laura sort of smiling at that one.
Yeah,
as well.
Laura is vigorously nodding. And Laura, if you want to jump in on like that specific thing, and I'm also curious because like one of the notes I had for you is like the tension between like, you are a wild zebra. And also like, but also you have a lot of certifications. Yeah. And so I'm just like, if you could just speak to if there's anything around like evidence-based, but then more generally, like what has your experience been being the wild zebra who also has many certifications?
Yeah. So I think that my identity as an engineer really informed a lot of like that rule following and like trying to get the right answer on the test. And like, there is one structured way to do things. And the really beautiful part about my PhD program is that I go to a school where I am fully supported in doing things my own way. So yes, like I had to do my coursework, but as I transitioned into my dissertation, the real focus is on you becoming the researcher. Like, you are making this stuff up. and not based on nothing, like you're standing on the shoulders of researchers who have come before you, but you are now like going into uncharted territory. So I feel like all the certifications that I have and my desire to master tools and skills has only like built a foundation for me to now come into this place, both in my business and in writing my dissertation, where like I get to do things the way I want to do them. I have enough structural knowledge that it is built on a really strong foundation. And now this is my launch pad. Like I get to go from here and create the research that I want and the business that I want.
Yeah, I love it. It is so, and it's so interesting. Like everyone, and I think I mentioned this in like the episode, like your 9 to 5 brain is coming with you. Like Jacqueline, you're talking about like, okay, there's this stuff coming from like the hierarchy of academia. Laura, I love that you touched on like once you're in your dissertation, it is that sort of higher research phase. Because one of the things I talked to my husband, I was just talking to my husband about this the other day, about how even he was like, even someone like an engineer, yeah, if you want to just come in and like sling some code, you're not gonna really climb, right? Like as an engineer, like the best engineers that climb into like architect roles, like the highest levels of engineering, they're thinking differently, right? And so it's so fun that like even thinking about like think like an entrepreneur, it's like, yeah, an employee also, right? If you want to climb the highest echelons of any corporate environment, you're going to be thinking at a different level. And it was just interesting for him to talk about how like some of the best engineering architects that he knows, they're not necessarily like just how do I fix this one bug? It's like, how do I like creatively, how do I use my resourcefulness and my creativity to design this like very complicated system? And you're sort of just saying like in your dissertation phase now, it's like you are that person within academia.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like leveraging all of that systems thinking that you only get, I think, by building somewhat of a foundation in whatever it is that you're doing, right? Then you're able to take all these pieces and like bring them together in a really creative way that expresses what you want it to be, right? But, there was part of that foundational work that I will never regret doing, right? Like those certifications all felt really fun for me to do as well, because I love lifelong learning. I love personal mastery. So all of those are components now that I get to just use in a really fun way.
Yeah, I love it. I want to ping pong back, Jacqueline. I'm curious, like from your perspective, and I'm going to open this, like, I would love to hear like all the thoughts about this. But when I was thinking about this podcast episode in particular, the thing that kept coming up for me was like, I didn't go for my PhD. I did think about it, but I'm like, I feel like a lot of the people that come to me, they were really good at school, right? They were, I don't know. I was like, I got the Pizza Hut book it thing when I was in elementary school. I graduated summa cum laude. I was voted most intellectual in my high school class, right? Like, and I was very attached to that. And so one of the things that I came up against in my business was I had what Carol Dweck. I feel like when I read Mindset by Carol Dweck, my mind was just fucking blown. Like I hadn't come into getting trained as a coach at the point when I read her work. But for those who are not familiar, she's a Stanford psychologist. She basically coined the terms, as far as I can tell, of like fixed mindset versus growth mindset. But she started observing like there's some difference within students and how they approach failure. And those kids that like believe that like smart is a thing that can be learned, have incentive to like want to grow and want to put themselves out there and want to like learn and fail and learn, right? Like, and have that process versus like some kids who are fixed mindset, which was definitely me, but like, if you believe, and this was, I think my challenge was like, I believed my identity. I identified as someone who was smart, but I also associated what my brain tied to that was getting the right answer. And so then I got into very dangerous territory when I came into entrepreneurship because I was like, wait a second. This is not the land that I have known for like my whole life. And I like really what I had to butt heads against was like, oh, what I was going to make it mean if I had to fail a bunch in order to make my business succeed, that meant I wasn't smart anymore. And I'm curious, like, if you guys, like, whether it's anything around that specifically or like things around like Carol Dweck's work. And for people who haven't read the book and this is like ringing some bells for you, I would highly recommend it. But yeah, Laura and Jacqueline, I would love to just hear like your perspective on this.
I can kick us off. Yeah, so she's in the positive psychology space, which is also a newer sort of division of psychology and super fascinating. And I love what you said about identifying as a smart person, because my flavor of type A perfectionist kind of a thing is actually a bit different than that. I didn't necessarily identify as a smart person. And I would say, obviously, that has changed quite a bit now. But interestingly enough, I think even the term perfectionist, I didn't identify with for a long time, because in my mind, that meant somebody who actually did things perfectly, which I never thought that I did. I still don't think that I do, but now I just have a much different perspective around that. But it was instead the identification with the hardworking piece. So it was like, once I learned that I could compensate for anything with hard work, that became like what I glued to. Like, okay, if I just am the hardest working in school, that will take me where I need to go. I could go all the way through a PhD with hard work. And that is specifically is now what I work with a lot of my clients on, because I was just actually writing about this the other day. It's like, when hard work is always your solution and then overworking becomes your problem, you have no solution. There's nothing that you can throw at that, because all you have is to work harder, and it doesn't continue to work in the same way. So that's why I love how you continuously challenge us in the mastermind to do it with less work, right? Not because we're entitled to not work hard, not because we're not committed to our businesses, but because oftentimes people like us land into that trap of, I can fix anything with hard work. I can avoid failing with hard work. And it's just not the experience of being an entrepreneur.
Oh yeah, I love that so much. That is so where I come into this as well, where like I am definitely on the hard work. I have a lot of grit and determination. I am a bulldog. Like I will do the thing, but I don't know that I ever really thought of myself as like super, super smart, right? And I was always like up there, but never like top of the class or the smartest one. Like I almost failed out of college my first semester. So, I definitely don't think that I attach so much of my identity to being smart, but definitely to working hard and having that be the thing. That's my thing. Right. So I definitely resonate so much with what you said about that. And then like taking that to the point where, yes, like I definitely experienced like burnout from that overwork, but not having another way to do it, at first before I got into the coaching world, where then I figured out like, oh, I can just manage my mind and like things won't be so bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting, because I think even though I'm like, oh man, I'm like alone on like I like identified as a smart kid. Anyway, it's fine. We'll find someone else for another episode who can riff on this with me. But like the hard work thing, and I am like always challenging you guys in the mastermind, because yeah, even though I was a smart kid, I think that was like my mom's side is a little like they've got some status. They're also like, we're like smart people. I don't know. Anyway. And then on my dad's side, he was super blue collar grit, work 9 to 9. Like and so, turns out we just get imprinted from our family. And so when I came I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to fucking work. Right. I'm just going to like work, and I'm going to like work harder, and I can work the hardest, and like, I'm going to go for it. And I do think it's so important. And this is actually reminding me, like, I'm like, oh, I should return to that concept of like white collar strategy and blue collar grit in like the podcast episode I had on my dad, because I think that really is the most masterful blend for an entrepreneur to have of like, I think of white collar strategy as like clean mind management, understanding how to leverage your thought and your brain and having awareness. And I'm going to have a whole podcast episode on soon, but I was thinking about particularly service-based businesses. When you're selling your own self, what you have is like a brain full of thoughts about yourself that like cloud your ability to even like just cleanly have strategic thinking. And so there's like that piece of it, but then also like the willingness, that blue collar grit. And I think for you guys, like coming into the mastermind, I see so many, it's like, yes, like we are willing to work hard. And I'm like, okay, but to scale, we got to do it like working less. So like, how are we going to do that? So if we were to like give the people just a taste of like how they could start to move towards that direction, what are some like a thought that people could sort of hang on to, a perspective to sort of consider, like as we're rounding out our time together, like where would you leave people on that?
I can kick us off again on that. I think knowing which direction you tend to land is the first place to start, because for instance, the way that I operate and Laura and our clients is sort of one sector, right? But then there are other people for whom have trouble working hard, not so much because they're not willing to, but because they're frozen in whatever they've got going on, right? And whatever fear they're experiencing. And it's just a different kind of a problem, but it's often linked to sort of like the same underlying mindset stuff. But you need to know which one you fall on. And again, I'm going to highlight your internal management podcast, because once you've got that information about yourself, then you know how to actually go about getting to the root of that issue. And then you can make change in the right direction. So another way to frame this would be, for me, if I were to listen to that podcast episode, let's rewind it, a year ago when I was first starting my business, I likely would have identified with the solution of overworking, because that was my quote unquote strength, right? So it was like, oh yes, that must be me. I must be somebody that just needs to work harder at this. And that wasn't the reality. I needed to see it from the other side of things and recognize, wait a minute, what happens when I slow down and that's not my solution? Oh, it brings up all of this mind drama about now it's not possible. Now I can't make it happen. That shows me that that's actually my work.
I love that. Lara, what about you?
Yeah, I think that just listening to what Jacqueline said and realizing that like my default MO is definitely like the asshole manager to myself. And so I think that all of this relates back to just having a lot of being able to allow yourself a lot of compassion for yourself in this process, right? Because if you're no longer going to be leaning on the tools that you've used to create your life and your success, whatever that looks like up to this point, you're going to fail a little bit and it's going to feel like all squidgy and weird, right? So it's kind of like, how can you hold yourself in a place where like you can have a lot of self-compassion during a time when you're going to be trying some new things that are going to be uncomfortable. So that's really, I think, a good starting place is like allowing yourself to feel compassion for yourself during the process of becoming an entrepreneur and like scaling your business.
Yeah, I second that.
Love it. All right. And then the most important question. People they've heard all the things from you and they want to come hire you. Where should they go to find you?
I'm mostly on Instagram at Jacqueline, JACQUELINES.coaching. And that would be the best place to start, or my website, which is jacquelinescoaching.com.
Yep. And same for me. I am mostly on Instagram. That's the best place to find me. I'm laura.a.mccaffrey. And you can also go to my website, laura-mccaffrey.com.
Love it. All right, you guys, all of the links will be in the show notes. Thank you guys so much for coming on today. And just, so much wisdom around just, learning some things and then learning a new way of being. And I don't know, I think just nerding out on psychology, because I think anyone who's listening to this is into it. So thank you so much, you guys. And I will see you on our mastermind call tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.